Imagine waking up at 4:30 in the morning. And no, there's no smartphone alarm softly chiming by your bed, no central heating automatically kicking on, nothing like that. You wake up in the pitch dark, freezing, and the window panes of the bedroom you share with your siblings, they're completely caked in thick frost. And you don't get to hit snooze. You have to creep out of bed and literally coax the glowing coals in the kitchen hearth back to life just to survive the morning. That was the exact, completely unglamorous reality for 14-year-old Edward Hildreth back in 1845 Townsend, Massachusetts. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tracing Edward's life to see exactly how a farm boy lived, worked, and learned right on the precipice of a massive historical shift.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with dawn on the farm, move into the art of barrel making, look at a year of hard labor, check out the schoolhouse and the Sabbath, explore community spirit and leisure, and finally we'll zoom out to examine the coming industrial revolution.
All right, first up, Section 1, Dawn on the Farm, Before the Sun Rises.
So, as I mentioned, Edward's day started brutally early. The central chimney colonial home he shared with his family was sparse, heated only by hearths or maybe a new cast-iron stove. But before breakfast even crossed his mind, Edward had to bundle up and face the elements. These essential farm animals completely dictated his mornings. You've got dairy cows that had to be milked twice daily, 365 days a year, no exceptions. Draft oxen needed feeding, pigs were fattened on scraps, and the sheep and chickens all needed tending. The absolutely crucial point here is that these animals didn't care if you were tired or if it was 20 degrees below freezing outside. Edward was out there mucking stalls, hauling water, and gathering eggs in the dark every single day before he ever saw a plate of food.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference in our worlds. Just compare our modern morning routine, a coffee, some cereal, maybe a pastry, directly to an 1845 farm breakfast. Edward was sitting down to hasty pudding, which is this really thick cornmeal mush mixed with maple syrup, plus rye bread, salted pork from last year's pig, overnight baked beans, and yes, hard cider. Hard cider for breakfast. It was actually safer than water back then. But they absolutely required this massive, calorie-dense meal just to fuel the intense physical labor that was about to begin.
Moving right along to Section 2, the art of barrel making, or mastering the cooperage.
After breakfast, Edward didn't go lounge on a couch. He went straight out to the workshop to learn a highly specialized trade alongside his father. Now notice this striking number, 62. Edward's father, Zachariah, was 62 years old, and he was still performing this back-breaking, highly skilled hand-to-labor day in and day out. At 14, Edward was at the perfect age to seriously learn the trade, observing his father and gradually taking on more complex tasks to build barrels. And remember, barrels were the vital, universal containers for absolutely everything in 1845.
Let's actually walk through this incredibly precise, handcrafted process. Step 1 is splitting the white oak right along the grain using a wedge-shaped tool called a froe. Step 2 is shaping the curve with a draw knife while sitting on a shaving horse. This was a process that built massive forearm and shoulder strength over time. Then Step 3, raising. This is where you'd really smell that rich scent of steaming oak and wood smoke, as they used heat from a small fire to bend the staves upright. Next is fitting the circular heads by cutting a precise groove, and finally driving those permanent iron hoops tightly into place with a heavy hammer. It was a rhythmic, totally exhausting art form.
That brings us to Section 3, a year of hard labor, battling the seasons.
You see, Edward's life wasn't just measured in daily chores. It was this constant, high-stakes battle against the seasons, where the absolute survival of the farm was always on the line. Just consider this massive number, 40. In late winter, before the spring thaw even began, Edward and his brother would trudge through deep snow to tap maple trees. They had to boil down 40 gallons of watery sap in miserable, freezing weather to produce just one single gallon of maple syrup. It's an exhausting ratio, but it was highly valuable for sweetening food and for trade.
Looking at the year as a whole, the pacing was just absolutely relentless. Spring meant battling rocky New England soil to plant rye and corn. Summer brought the critical hay harvest. And make no mistake, if that summer haying failed, the cattle would starve in the winter, and the entire farm economy collapsed. No pressure, right? Fall was a desperate race against the cold, husking corn, pressing cider, and slaughtering the pig. Winter offered the closest thing to rest, but really, that just meant moving indoors to the cooperage, splitting firewood, and mending tools.
All right, Section 4, Schoolhouse and the Sabbath, Education and Spirit.
Now, Edward's life wasn't exclusively physical labor. We also need to look at how his mind and his soul were shaped by his town's institutions. His educational reality was incredibly strict. Because his labor was so desperately needed on the farm, Edward only attended the winter term. He learned in a one-room building with a single cast-iron stove. If you sat near it, you literally roasted. If you sat in the corners, you froze. The curriculum was narrow but rigorous: McGuffey readers, copperplate writing, arithmetic, and strict oral recitation. What's really fascinating here is that the teacher was likely a young woman in her late teens managing 30-plus students at once. This was a direct result of Horace Mann's ongoing educational reforms in Massachusetts, though, unfortunately, female teachers were still only paid half of what a man earned.
And then there was Sunday, the Sabbath. The only day of rest, but it came with its own strict demands. Farm work was completely forbidden, and Edward would sit in the Congregational Church for exhausting 90 to 120-minute sermons. But as this quote highlights, the great moral question tearing at New England's conscience was slavery. Sitting in those hard wooden pews, young Edward was absorbing powerful, increasingly vocal abolitionist messaging from educated ministers, which deeply shaped his worldview.
Moving to our fifth section, community spirit and leisure, finding joy in work. Now you might think this all sounds like a grim, all-work, no-play existence. But 1845 Townsend wasn't joyless. They brilliantly merged intense communal labor with social entertainment. Take barn raisings. They were incredibly dangerous construction events, but they were always followed by massive feasts and dancing. And for a 14-year-old boy like Edward, the husking bee was the main event. It was this communal corn husking, where finding a rare red ear of corn meant you earned the right to kiss any girl in the room. A bit of fun, mildly transgressive excitement for a teenager. There were quilting bees for the women, and the 4th of July meant picnics, parades, and actual cannon fire. For personal leisure, Edward would fish the Squannacook River, hunt partridges with a musket, and sled down the frozen hills on wooden sleds.
But how long could this quiet, rhythmic farm life last? So what does this all mean for Edward? Well, just beyond the borders of Townsend, a massive, unstoppable disruption was already steaming toward them. Which perfectly tees up our final section, the coming Industrial Revolution. The steam whistle blows. Now, what's really interesting here as we zoom out to the macro level is the stark contrast between these two colliding worlds. On one side, you have Edward's agrarian life, powered by slow-moving oxen, guided entirely by the rhythm of the seasons, isolated and completely dependent on manual hand tools and unpredictable weather. On the exact opposite side, the approaching industrial life, powered by steam, driven by the rigid ticking of clocks, and connected by the new 1842 Fitchburg Railroad. The loud, cash-driven factory life of the Lowell Mills was just 20 miles away, literally creeping closer to their isolated town every single day via steam locomotives.
And here is the profound conclusion to Edward's story. Within 5 years, Edward doesn't stay on the farm. He actually leaves Townsend for Berlin to become a machinist. He literally chases the steam whistle, leaving his father's ancient way of life behind forever, and in doing so, he traces the exact arc of the American Industrial Revolution.
So, I'll leave you with this to think about. What modern comfort would you miss the most? And what would you gain if your smartphone alarm was suddenly replaced by a bellowing ox and frost-covered window panes? It's a completely different world for sure, but understanding it helps us really grasp the foundation of the fast-paced era we live in today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.